Welcome to another episode of Articulated Points. Phil and I are here again. I'm Pat, of course. How have things been going for you, Philip?
That's good. We busted out a few talking points in between our last full episode, so I'm eager to get back into the full swing of things.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really good to talk to you again. There's some things that I actually wanted to do last year that I wanted to cover, but we didn't get to it. So I'm happy to get to it this year, as well as just some other stuff that you and I have kind of been digging into forever, which kind of, I guess, brings us to our first topic, doesn't it?
Yeah, honestly, kind of goes back to me actually starting being a G.I.Joe collector, actually.
How is that?
It's the Stars and Stripes Forever set that came out in 1997. It was so messed up, it made me want to seek out the original toys, just so I could have a more accurate looking set.
Yeah, I know how you feel. The images that we are initially shown for Stars and Stripes Forever isn't quite what ended up being inside the box. I think I can actually remember going into Toys R Us. It was in 1997, I was still in college, so I was a poor college student, flipping the box open and being like, I don't know if I have the cash for this right now. I was a poor college student, I just decided to wait. Well, I graduated in 98, started making some money, and $10 at that point wasn't too expensive. And there are plenty of them for $10. But knowing what I know now, I definitely would have tried to buy some of those early ones at full price, no matter what it cost. And I probably would have been scouring Toys R Us a little more meticulously. Wouldn't I have? That would have been smart.
Alright, so let's just stop talking obliquely and get into a little bit of history here. This is the Stars and Stripes box set. It's got a beautiful presentation to it. The flag even, continues up on top. It's spilling over, reusing this great 1982 Ron Rudat art, I believe. And it fills you with a whole bunch of hope on the back when you look at what we're supposed to get. We didn't get that. And that goes back to, I think it's fair to say that the people in charge of the 1997 G.I. Joe Toys R Us relaunch line, 15th anniversary, were in over their head.
Yeah, I think that the lines of communication may have been something that kind of needed to be reestablished at that point. Not only for the design process, but also just communicating to China what tooling to use, the approval process of what is and is not considered acceptable quality, what materials to use. It really seemed like they were starting all over again, but had, tooling from the vintage line.
Keep in mind, this was still only 3 years removed from the end of the original vintage run, 1982 to 1984. This was not that far. It's not like, it had been 15 years and all this knowledge was lost. Everybody was gone. No, it was just a different department in charge, and they didn't know what kind of plastic to use, so we got this really shiny, waxy feeling plastic that's prone to crumbling. They chose figure molds without knowing whether or not they were still tracked, if Hasbro even still had them in their possession. And they decided, based on the feedback they got from their original 8-figure pitch, to greatly expand the line. And that just kind of caused more problems because now they had to fill out a roster that they couldn't fill out. And if future me has edited this properly, you'll see pictures of the original 8 proposed figures.
The figures that came out seem to go through several iterations of even what was planned for release. I believe that originally they had promised 2 sets of 4 figures to all retailers, and nobody was interested. And so that plan got revised, and Toys R Us was always a great partner for G.I. Joe, and they agreed to several sets of figures. But I kind of think that maybe the people at Hasbro bit off a little more than they could chew for that first year. Maybe it would have been a better idea to go with those 2 sets of 4 figures and stop there. And I don't even know if they could have gotten those 4 done, judging from what was shown and what tooling they had.
Yeah, for instance, I think it's prominent showing the Firefly in there. The one that's shown in the Toy Fair picture doesn't look too different from the original 1984 Firefly. It could be totally repainted, but the lighting just kind of makes it look like that gray urban camo he wore. But if you look at the press photo for the Rage, it shows Firefly in the cockpit, and the little computer or explosive whatever thing on his wrist actually has some additional paint that the original retail figure did not have. So it was slightly updated. But then, of course, that Firefly was nowhere to be found in 1997. It wouldn't show up until 98 in an entirely different color scheme. And you could see the Silver Mirage. The card art for that shows Roadblock in the gunner seat. And that is not the original art. Somebody actually painted in that Roadblock. Of course, he's not in the 1997 line. But he kind of was, if you were lucky.
If you were very lucky, actually. Yeah, because the Stars and Stripes set seemed to be a combination of some of those other plans, and I'm not sure if it was just a shuffling of paperwork that had things a little bit confused, but whenever parts were not able to be found for the characters that were intended for the set, Roadblock, who was originally pictured on the Silver Mirage, his plans ended up being shifted into that Stars and Stripes set, and the parts, the tooling for Roadblock ended up being reused. And there definitely seemed to be some confusion on how the colors should have been changed, because some of the pre-production Roadblock actually was even more confusing than what was initially released. Why don't you show them what you have?
I have Rock and Roll. And anybody who knows their G.I. Joe history knows this is not what Rock and Roll should look like. Just to put it mildly.
Yeah, it's a very different looking figure than what was expected. To fill you in, the pre-production set that I've seen, that was on eBay actually many years ago of this, was also an African-American rock and roll, but only in the fact that it was the same as that in the hair color and in the arms. It actually still had the Caucasian molded head. So it looked very, very strange. Was definitely not what was going to come out. So that was the pre-production figure, so I think that whenever they changed it to be completely African-American, and then changed it yet again to be completely Caucasian. But it really, that oversimplifies all the changes, doesn't it?
Yeah, before we get any further, I think it's probably a good idea for us to go over the Stars and Stripes set again. So, it was in base 8 figures, all based on 1982 figure releases. You had Stalker, Scarlet, Grunt, Snake Eyes, Zap, Short Fuse, Rock and Roll, Breaker, and a little newly molded playset platform
mound
sort of thing. Yeah, mounded dirt
bunker
with a flag that could poke into it, so you could sort of recreate the card art or the artwork on the box. As an aside, and just to show how rushed, this is their entire tooling budget almost goes into this little playset, and the stars on the flag, they gave it the wrong amount of stars, and to cover up that fact, they just didn't paint some of the sculpted stars on there.
You look at it in one glance, and it's definitely not the correct American flag, which is very, very shameful, to be honest, very shameful.
Well, on the other hand, you can just drop it on the ground and it won't be an issue, so.
I suppose so.
Now, there exists a number of variations across almost all of the figures in this set, and that's actually what we're here to talk about today. But prior to our recording of this, I think the best resource out there was the Rock Guide that James Kavanaugh published many years ago. It's now out of print, but it does cover quite a few of the variations on on the page it has for this, which is actually page 6. and you can see a quick glimpse of it right there. But as in-depth as he tried to be, even he doesn't have all of them. And in fact, I actually discovered a variation in 2015. That's 18 years after this set came out, and we're still discovering things that are different, weird, what have you about it. And that kind of tells you how crazy this actual set is.
Yeah, I think that the title Stars and Stripes Forever is appropriate because it takes on a double meaning. Meaning that forever is how long we'll be still looking at this set for potential variations. Because it really seems to never end. They were making corrections on this set well into its final run. Now, there is a set that I would consider the common version because some of these are very easy to find. So I would think that you could actually look at some of these and say that's the final intended product and all the ones before it are the earlier ones or the rare ones. But even among those, there are minor tiny changes happening. It's seemingly all the time toward the beginning of this thing.
Yeah, basically if you picked up your set, say 2 months or so after release, you got the common set and the common figures. But anytime before that, if you were lucky enough or obsessive a fan enough to jump on it as soon as it showed up, you might have some of these in your collection and not even realize it.
Yeah, and some of them are so rare that I would have to think that distribution issues probably would have dumped some of these more commonly in some areas than others. Most likely on the West Coast, I would think that some of them would have been easier to find.
So we started with rock and roll, so let's go back to that. I do want to point out, again, another symptom of this set, his file card from the Whirlwind, not actually from his card art.
It's still rock and roll, though, so it works.
So why don't you go ahead and show off all the variations you have for rock and roll?
Okay, I will start first with what I consider the common one, just to kind of show him off, and to create a baseline for what you can expect if you were to buy one of these on eBay with a box. That's the other nice thing about this set, is that the box is one that flips open like an old Lego set, so you can actually see inside what you are getting. And sometimes when you're looking at these on eBay, the seller may not actually flip the set open. If you were to buy one sight unseen, you'd be very lucky if it wasn't this figure right here. This is probably what you would get if you were to buy it without actually flipping it open and knowing what you were going to get. Even if you did have it flipped open, it would probably be this figure. The other figure that I will show you is this one by comparison. Now, the major difference is obvious, but it doesn't stop there, because the knife on this one that I have is actually a bronzish color. I want to say it's kind of a gold, while the belt buckle is silver. And on the standard release, they are both silver. Now, the thing that I found interesting is that at another point, whenever I got another one, I found that they had actually changed the color of the elbow joint on the arms.
The swivel arm battle grip.
Yeah, you have the upper arm and the forearm, and then you kind of have like that elbow joint that's just the very standard swivel arm joint. And for whatever reason, that ended up changing colors, because his forearm doesn't actually match the paint on his bicep. His biceps are painted, and strangely, the elbow joint on one figure matches the forearm, on the other figure matches the bicep. I don't really know why that's the case, but I should note that on both of these figures, it is the same, where it has a silver belt buckle and a bronze knife. And what do you have?
I have an African American rock and roll with a bronze knife and a bronze buckle.
It's maddening.
And his swivel arm battle grip matches the upper arm.
So I would assume that is probably the even earlier African American rock and roll. That's going to be my assumption, because if the belt buckle got changed to silver and matches the very, very common figure, logic would dictate that that one actually predates the two of them that I have.
Now, The Rock Guide mentions a bronze buckle on a Caucasian rock and roll.
It's a little confusing. I mean, maybe they flip-flop back and forth. It's also possible that some of these things just ended up on parts trays or in bins at the factory, and they weren't using a strict first-in, first-out process of getting everything done. The 1997 stuff is all very, very feeling hodgepodge together and not having consistent quality control. So, I mean, that seems entirely likely that that's something that exists, but I wouldn't really know why.
And it actually reminds me, once I actually got my African American rock and roll, I stuck a roadblock head on that body just to see what a 1997 roadblock would have looked like. And to my surprise, I could not get the chest to close around the head, which tells me they were also spending their tooling budget retooling the insides.
Yeah, they reshaped a lot of them. If you take some of these figures apart, like Destro, instead of, like a standard G.I. Joe figure has like a ball right at the base of the neck with two pegs that stick off the side that inhibit it from just being able to spin around, you know, Exorcist style. With the 1997 line, for whatever reason, they joined those two pegs with a bar right in front. And I don't really know why that's there, because the result is that the figures can no longer look forward.
The end result is that the Vipers from that year just kind of stare at their feet.
Yeah, the shoegazing Vipers. Yeah, it's a shame.
I should point out Scarlet and Stalker from the set. Now, so far, these are the two figures we haven't found a variation for. But we can never say never with this set.
Yep, Stars and Stripes, never say never.
And now we start getting into some of the more subtle variations. This was one I didn't realize existed for a long time, and that is, in fact, Snake Eyes. This is the standard Snake Eyes. You'll notice he has a silver belt buckle and an entirely silver top on his explosive on his leg. But there exists another Snake Eyes variation where he has an unpainted belt buckle, and the little clock face on his explosive isn't painted silver either. It looks like, judging by the depth of the silver paint on the common figure, this was a second paint app that was added on later.
It's such a strange change to make. I don't think that that change would have actually sold me on the figure. You know, I'm not going to look at it and go, well, timer's not painted on this thing, I'm not buying it. Oh, no.
Did something just break on you?
No, my two grunts weren't the same.
What? We're learning on camera here that there's a possible grunt variation.
This is just happenstance.
It's like we planned this, but we really didn't.
If you look here at the back of his right shoulder, you can see that the colors of the camouflage pattern has been completely swapped.
Reversed.
Which ones are red and which ones are green. So you end up with tiny changes like that make it really annoying as a collector, because it's just sitting in my other room there, and then we're on camera and suddenly there's another variation on the Stars and Stripes set.
This could be an error figure. Until we see a lot more, we can't say for certain.
You are correct. I probably should note just, I don't think that this really makes a difference, but there is, and it doesn't. I really don't think. I have a theory on why this happens. I think that it's a matter of them cleaning or not cleaning. Oh no.
It's just getting worse.
It is getting worse. Well, I'll cover up the other thing that I just noticed. But take a look at that. I was just going to point out that there's more of a sporadic look to the camouflage.
Mm-hmm.
But now take a look at this. The belt loop on one of them is painted, and the belt loop on the other is not painted.
The belt loop on mine is painted.
Yeah, it's actually all three belt loops. Unpainted belt loop, unpainted belt loop, unpainted belt loop.
All right, you heard it here first. 2019, 22 years after release. Another variation found.
That's ridiculous. That's completely ridiculous.
So, do I use the intro I screwed up where I just said Starker and Scarlet don't have variations? Or
I
do
think
go
we're going to have to explain that we went back and we re-recorded that, but now it doesn't make sense. We were going to cheat, everyone. He forgot to mention that Grunt was one of the figures that had no variations. So we went back and re-recorded him saying that.
Yeah.
And now that's just not true. So you were right the first time, Phil. The only two without variations are Stalker and Scarlet. Wait. Maybe I need to take a better look at my Stalker and Scarlet.
No, no.
That's ridiculous. That's truly ridiculous.
Now, I think the next figure we'll talk about is Short Fuse. This is a variation you first brought to my attention way back in 2012.
And I will credit this to noted author, who we've already noted, James Kavanaugh Jr. actually brought this to my attention.
Now, your standard Short Fuse looks something like this. And I say just something because the spray pattern on the legs was actually all hand applied. So no two Short Fuses are actually alike. Sometimes you'll get a little bit more of the pinkish orange on there, sometimes it's barely visible. But wasn't always the case. See, originally, Short Fuse came out with these brown pants. It's kind of just sprayed on over a base plastic, which is kind of a cream plastic. I don't know if that was a later decision when they realized him wearing cream pants really did not look very manly, or what, but that carries over into his accessories. Now, if you're familiar with the Stars and Stripes Forever set, you may know that Short Fuse comes with his standard mortar, but for some reason he also comes with Zap's bazooka, and as well as his backpack. Your standard ones are this kind of lightish green olive drab color. The backpack's olive drab with black rockets. But Brown Pants Short Fuse comes with a cream bazooka that matches his base plastic, as well as this tan backpack with green rockets that is in fact also molded in the cream plastic.
Yeah, I actually didn't know about this one until James had mentioned it during the creation of his book. This figure's weird. A lot of these figures are weird, obviously, but the cream color actually is the base color of the chest as well. If you open up a Short Fuse, that's the color of his chest. They've completely painted over the chest in green. And the Dark Pants Short Fuse actually has lighter hair. The hair is a distinctly lighter color on mine. Yeah, much different.
Oh yeah, it's an orange, yeah.
So that's certainly interesting. And I do have these in the package. So we have the ability to see the cream-colored bazooka in there with the mortar. So I have to conclude that if the cream-colored bazooka is with the mortar, that it therefore belongs to Short Fuse.
Alright, the next variation isn't so terribly obvious, isn't also terribly interesting, but we should note it here. And you really wouldn't notice it unless you've got them side by side, but the torsos on Breaker are slightly different shades of green. One's a little more muted, one's a little more lime. And again, it's not something you'd pick up unless you actually had both in your hands at the same time.
Yes, and at the convention, actually, there was a convention, probably, was it the 97 convention? I think it was, where there was like an early bird set of figures for the 1997 line where they sold what were essentially test shots of the figures. I think that the nice way of distinguishing one of those breakers from the other is that one of the two of them matches the color of the convention test shot and one of them does not.
And now we get to the variation I noticed in 2015. And this was entirely by accident, really. I thought it was a paint error when I got it. Zap has two different hairlines. One is your standard rounded off 1982 looking paint mask. The other is this really weird, like, receding hairline spaghetti strand thing.
Making me feel self-conscious.
I'm not sure what they were going with this, but I did, at the time, talk to people who worked at Hasbro. I should clarify they did not work on the Stars and Stripes Forever set, but based on their expertise on how a toy is manufactured, they pointed out that this was not an accident. This had to have been made with a paint mask.
Yeah, and I think that it would be worth noting that whenever I saw that earlier set on eBay, that it did include that hairline, correct?
Well, I know a few others have been shown off, but not a whole lot. The Zap standard accessories are the green bazooka that matches the color of his pants, and this black backpack with green rockets. And of course, since it's Stars and Stripes Forever, the backpack is molded in that green and then just entirely painted over. But with my alternate hairline Zap, I have that same green bazooka, but the backpack colors are reversed. It's a green backpack with black rockets, and frankly that makes a lot more sense, especially paint-wise.
It may be worth noting that so far of the bazookas that have been found, the handles on the forest green one are the large handle bazooka that would be common in 1983 for the original swivel arm figure, but the other two, the cream colored one and the light green bazooka, are the thin-handled bazooka. So it seems that they weren't even using the same tooling.
Which, I mean, makes sense given how haphazard 1997 as a whole was.
I kind of wonder if they were doing that because of the condition of things or just to double up on certain projects and get things done a little bit faster. Who knows? It seems very much rushed. But all in all told, this set still has a bit of fondness for me because 1994 is very sad for G.I. Joe to end. So to see that there was still love for G.I. Joe in this fashion, I guess I shouldn't say G.I. Joe ended because obviously we had Savage and Extreme and 12-inch was going strong there for a while. But 3 3/4-inch O-ring figures were gone, and this was kind of a glimmer of hope. And then following that, of course, there was another set in 98, and then 2000, 2001, and the big relaunch in 2002.
1997, for all its faults, it really did signify that there was an audience out there for the 3 3/4-inch Real American Hero mythos, and even with the weird aberration into Micro Machines in 1999, it launched a rebirth of the G.I. Joes that we knew that went all the way into, I think, even the beginning of this year before it finally tapered off again.
Yeah, that's very true. It'll be back. G.I. Joe will be back.
Switching gears now, we're gonna go into Star Wars, but not necessarily the Star Wars you know. And I guess I wanted to introduce this because it actually kind of goes into my history as a fan of Star Wars in general, science fiction. I was sort of a fan of Star Trek already by this point, but I actively, as a kid, avoided liking Star Wars. And it is a totally shallow reason. My older brother liked Star Wars and had Star Wars toys. And sibling rivalry being what it was, I was like, no, Star Wars, not good, not for me.
My older brother and I both were all about Star Wars. We loved it.
Yeah, it wasn't until my brother actually got me to sit down and watch our recording of Return of the Jedi that I actually, okay, I kind of get it now. Big space battles, explosions, cool laser swords, hot chick in a metal bikini. I was a little too young for that part still, but and then
I wasn't.
And then not too long after, A New Hope aired on HBO, and I actually got to see the first movie. So yeah, I actually saw this episode 645. That's the way I saw the movies.
Wow.
Which explains why Return of the Jedi is my favorite, probably. But once I saw A New Hope, I was hooked. I got it. I understood why my brother liked Star Wars. I understand why anyone would like Star Wars. I can't remember if this was before or after Star Tours had opened at Disneyland, but I do know that my parents took us to, I don't know if it was a comic book store or a pawn shop. I was so young. I'm pretty sure this was the early 90s, so it would have been after Star Tours opened. But they got me this magazine that was there. It had already been out for a while, but they were indulging my newfound love of Star Wars. This Starlog magazine. You can see how worn, torn, the cover is being held on with tape. Oh, a spectacular 10th anniversary salute to George Lucas' Star Wars. So this would have been 1987, the year that Star Tours opened. And this was some of my first Star Wars merchandise. and you can tell just by how well loved this magazine is. And one of the first things that enthralled me was this article. The Star Wars. It's just a few short pages, but it's showing off that awesome, wonderful, fantastic, I can't get enough of it, Ralph McQuarrie concept art. And from that moment I was hooked. I liked Star Wars as it is, but the Star Wars that it could have been, that existed in my brain, that could have been without any budget, any pie in the sky dreaming of what you could put on the screen, that is something I had wanted to see ever since.
You're kind of making me jealous and making me want to go back and buy a bunch of issues of Starlog. See, this is the problem sometimes when we sit down and talk. It's like, my bank account suffers. I'm going to have to go back and pick up that book, because that was not my initial exposure to the concept Star Wars. My initial exposure to it was the Return of the Jedi sketchbook, actually. There was a used bookstore that was in what was called the Town Mall, actually. And they had some old books, and Star Wars was actually well gone by the time that I realized that book was available. And this was probably 1990, maybe 91, that this bookstore still had surplus amounts of just old Star Wars books, and they had the sketchbook for Return of the Jedi. And I remember, for whatever reason, to mark them as overstock, there was like red marker was just taken down the side of the book and marked across it, and then they were just very cheap at this bookstore. And as I flipped through it, it definitely excited me for all of the pre-production stuff that went into Star Wars. I think that anytime you really love something, whether it's G.I. Joe or Star Wars or anything else, going back and seeing those initial thoughts that were going into it in the pre-production process kind of gives you an idea of what great things were lost in the process and what great things were also built upon, and gives you a better sense of just fully the deep dive and understanding it better.
So that's what we're looking into, is the Star Wars that never was, the concept art toys that take these things that didn't really exist and made them real. And I should point out, as part of that Starlog, there was this little pull-out poster art for the Millennium Falcon. And there's even stuff on the back of, all about the Millennium Falcon, and it even includes a picture of the prototype model for it before it was completely redone, because I think they thought it was a little too similar to the ship from space 1999.
Interestingly, I was actually in Walmart, and currently at Walmart you can go buy a model kit for the Eagle from space 1999.
We're going to mainly focus on the efforts by Kenner Hasbro in making their 3 3/4 inch figures. There's a lot of stuff out there actually based on the original concept art of McQuarrie and others. And like the Star Wars Action Fleet had its own line. There was Hot Wheels also?
Yeah, there is some Hot Wheels stuff. I will show some of that later.
But the first thing I should point out goes back to the vintage collection from the original release in 1978 to 1985. And that, believe it or not, is the Cloud Car pilot. But wait, before you get out the pitchforks and torches, he was in the movie. His head was in the movie. There were heads in the model of the ship, but the rest of the guy didn't really exist. So Kenner was putting out the Cloud Car as a vehicle. It needed a pilot. What they used were uniforms based on concept art by Nilo Rodis Jamero. So that makes this officially the first concept art figure out there.
Yeah, I guess that's opposed to what they were doing with characters like the ones from the Cantina, where they had a couple of photos that Lucasfilm had sent over and they just kind of made up the rest.
Before that, you had Kenner filling in the blanks and then, making up their own expanded universe with like the mini rigs. But this one, existing Lucasfilm precedent. But that's about it until 1997, 1998, when Kenner had the run of the license again, and they were doing their short-lived expanded universe line. And to help augment that, they actually made some vehicles based off concept art. And of the three, this is probably the best one. I think we both agree on that.
Yeah.
This is the Air Speeder, a precursor to the Snow Speeder. And Kenner being Kenner in the late 90s, these things had to have both missile launching and some other sort of action feature. So wings pop up on these. I don't know why the wings pop up on these, but wings pop up on these. It certainly was not evident in the concept art that they used, which they put on the box, and as well as a little file card on the back. And as you can see, yeah, there's no way the wings popped up. And even the art doesn't quite match the toy, so even then these were adaptations of the art because, you know, you had to make it work in the real world with the tooling budget, and also, you know, people putting their own little spin on it.
I think that these were great. I love that thing because we, you know, the Star Wars toy line that relaunched in 1995 was a huge success. And to get some figures that were a little more unique and not just something that was an updated version of something that had come out before was really a lot of what I wanted from that toy line. And them going back to the original watering hole of Lucasfilm and giving us something like that, I think was a good way of filling in the other price points that they wanted to offer.
Yeah, and of course, if you're making the vehicle, you got to make the pilot. We got our first Ralph McQuarrie-inspired action figures in this Airspeeder pilot. And I think you got something to say about that, right?
I do. If you're generally interested in all of the concept art by Ralph McQuarrie, there has been an amazing set of books. It's actually 2 books, and I think that it's only 2 books because putting it in one would make it impossible to flip through. When I picked it up, I was amazed. It actually is something like 21 pounds for the 2 books, so they are not light.
It would break your coffee table.
Yeah, it'd break your coffee table. This is actually what they come in, and right here on page 73, I actually just happened while we were getting ready to record, I flipped the page open and said, hey, there he is. There is the figure that Kenner released. So they were definitely looking through the photo reference that they had and picking things that would have sold well. I think Hoth was popular, so it made sense to make that figure, and that is most definitely the set that I like the best from that set of 3 that they did. Which, why don't you show us one of the other ones from the time?
Right, and the next one, speaking of cloud car pilots, the cloud car. Obviously this is not a twin cloud car, early iteration. Now interestingly, the bubble top on here is not present in the art that Kenner even used on their packaging. So again, taking some liberties. This also has a pilot in it, so you can hear the way he's shaking. He's not exactly stable in there. Again, weird spring out part of the vehicle, just wings that pop to the side. And while there's a little chin gun under here, Hasbro felt the need for you to manually pull out the sides of this so you can then fire the nose cone. Looks kind of weird, I think. Adding to the strangeness of it all, the cockpit is connected at the back by a ball joint. Very strange, kind of an early and definitely unconventional use of a ball joint in a toy, but the toy that Kenner put out. But there we go. This is the Cloud Car Pilot. Looks a lot like a green Bespin security guard. So that's a interesting design choice to go with, and a far cry from what Kenner originally put out.
There's something about that figure that reminds me of Thunderbirds or something that I can't quite put my finger on. That
It's the hat.
he looks like something else. Is it the hat?
It's a hat. It's the very Thunderbirds-ish, yeah.
And that was a set of 3, so what was the third one?
The third one was this interesting take on the speeder bike, which more than anything else I get riding lawnmower from. It does not look anywhere near as sleek or elegant as the one we saw on Return of the Jedi. Interestingly, though this one was not designed by Ralph McQuarrie, this was designed by Joe Johnston. And if that name sounds familiar to you, it's because he went on to direct movies like The Rocketeer and Captain America: The First Avenger. He's really moved up in the chain of command, and it's nice that we actually have toys based on his original design sketches as well. Again, you have the usual Kenner mandates of rocket firing missile, but I think the spring out feature on this one is even more bizarre than all the other two. It's the two bars in front, I'm not quite sure what you'd call them, they just kind of swing around. That, to me, looks weird and terribly inefficient, especially if you're trying to squeeze through a small space. You suddenly need to have as much space wide as you are long to fit through to do that, and that doesn't seem aerodynamic either. I'm not sure what the point of that would be at all.
Yeah, but luckily you can just not do that. Just leave the toy in one way and don't push that button.
And of course, since it's an open cockpit, the design of the speeder bike pilot, who's a rebel here, not Imperial, does match the one in the artwork shown. Interestingly enough, though, Kenner did put out a commercial for these three vehicles, and much like G.I. Joe in the 90s, it starts with a live-action segment. You see this speeder bike pilot being chased by scout troopers in the Return of the Jedi style speeder bike. So there we go. Somebody made a costume and a prop design for that.
That's interesting. I actually don't remember seeing that ever. I don't think I've ever seen that, and this may be the first time I've ever even heard of it.
And that speeder bike looks like nothing so much as it looks like foam core. They did their best to make it look exciting.
Yeah, I guess it counts. Wonder where this thing is now, or the outfit.
From there, our next jump is up to 2003, when, you know, Hasbro, fully in charge of the brand now, no misgivings about Kenner still being a division, puts out a Ralph McQuarrie-inspired Stormtrooper that was apparently a winner of a Fan's Choice poll. I jumped on this because, going back to that Starlog, this is stuff that had been in my brain for, 15 years at least by that point. He has a shield and a lightsaber because in the Star Wars, everybody has a lightsaber. And he also has a blaster that fits in a ridiculously large holster on his side.
They didn't even just give him the lightsaber, which I guess at that point probably would have only been referred to as a laser sword.
Probably, yeah.
But it also, the emitter seems to be a lot thicker. Like the beam coming out of the emitter is a lot thicker and then tapers off quickly. So it doesn't even look like a standard lightsaber that you would see with any of the Hasbro action figures.
And it's got this solid white core that goes through it, all in an effort to further, mimic that look of the laser swords in the artwork, which I can appreciate that for sure.
Yeah, they definitely went the extra mile there.
But at the time, I thought that would be it. Little did I know that just 4 years later, it would explode. 2007, the anniversary of A New Hope's release. And Hasbro, as a gift to fans, went all out that year. First things first, they re-released the Stormtrooper, but in more accurate McQuarrie-esque colors. Whereas before it was a Stormtrooper as a McQuarrie design, but your standard black and white Stormtrooper color motif. This one has some silver, it's got some gray, it's got a little bit of red on a shoulder insignia. It was overall a more intricate paint job, and another reason for me to justify picking up this figure because it's entirely unique from this one. Otherwise, it's the exact same mold. It did not come with the stand this time. Figures this year came out with a coin. It was available in either a silver coin or a gold coin. The gold was kind of a promotion going through that year, and you saw it on a couple other figures released this year. But the amount of figures we got is actually what made me so happy. For starters, we got the weird bat-like Chewbacca. This is a figure that was straight out of the artwork shown in my Starlog magazine. We got a character, they called him Han Solo. I don't think he was Han Solo originally in the book. I think this was another version of Starkiller that I had only seen in this sort of shade of pink before. So full color, full rendered. And these figures had better articulation than the Stormtrooper.
What else came out that year?
So there's also the figure they call the Star Killer Hero. I just kind of think of her as like a Princess Leia analog, given that we got McQuarrie designs for every other major character. The great thing is that harness over her face, the mask, this harness over here, this is all removable gear. You can give them different looks. It wouldn't be Star Wars if we didn't have a Darth Vader. Now, I will admit, this Vader isn't too terribly strange and unique compared to some of the other figure looks we've gotten, but it does match sort of the iconic duel between a Luke Skywalker and a Darth Vader art. Plus, he came with an alternate head that's even more bizarre and warped, so you can get even weirder with the McQuarrie designs, and honestly, who wouldn't love that?
Yeah, I actually think that the second book that's in the McQuarrie book set, one of those helmets is actually on the cover.
We have a McQuarrie-inspired Boba Fett. And this Boba Fett's just weird. I mean, I've given him the helmet that looks a little closer to final design, but of course he's obviously all in white.
That's actually the first figure that I got from the McQuarrie concept figures.
He comes with an alternate head that looks even weirder, and I can appreciate getting weirder with these figures. A little feature that I really do appreciate, though, this is a Boba Fett that can actually use his flamethrower.
He also has the stomach gun, though. That's one of my favorite features of that figure.
I'm not quite sure how much sucking in of his gut he has to do, or if he's meant to be a cyborg, or what.
He's part like G.I. Joe Overkill, or maybe Buttons McBoom Boom. This is the Buttons McBoom Boom of the Star Wars universe.
I don't know if you want to tell Boba Fett that to his face, but, you know. I, in some ways, am not terribly curious. I had my, my magazine of McQuarrie art, but I did not really search out other designs. I just kind of kept the 5 things I had on hand, so I didn't realize there was this version of McQuarrie's Snowtrooper concept. He's got a removable helmet, a removable face mask thing, and this really terrifying helmet underneath.
I like the way that the face mask is removable on that, because it really highlights the fact that in the finished movie, the goggles on the snowtroopers, or the hostile environment troopers, whatever you may want to actually call those stormtroopers that invade Hoth, the goggles on them, and even part of the top of the helmet looks like it's the same general shape. Not exactly, but generally speaking is very similar to a stormtrooper, and then they just have that additional covering.
And then we got gifts like this Rebel Trooper, which looks nothing so much like a man in spandex wearing an oyster on his head.
That's pretty accurate, yes.
But thankfully, the helmet comes off on top, and since it's a ball-jointed neck, you can pull the bottom half of the helmet off and give it more of a human appearance. The chest armor is actually removable too.
Yeah, that's really a good one.
Now we got to the part where being a collector sometimes sucks, because it was 2007 and we had some exclusives we had to deal with. First off, there was Celebration 4. This took place in Los Angeles, and you had to either know someone or get really lucky with the online sale later. But a Celebration exclusive was C-3PO and R2-D2. You'll notice this is a very Metropolis-inspired 3PO, and then this R2 with the crazy head arms and the all-silver look. I think mine came broken out of the package because his little antenna on the head doesn't seem to extend both sides symmetrically.
Yeah, those were ridiculously expensive, so I got very lucky. I managed to take the third option on those and found them at Five Below.
Technically, there's actually a fourth one because a smaller amount of those were packaged and available at Celebration Europe that year. Different sticker. The Celebration 4 logo was replaced with the Celebration Europe, and the coin actually changed on there as well. But there was another Celebration exclusive figure, and that is the one that's kind of really stings. It's Luke Skywalker. How could you make your main character a convention exclusive? I don't know.
Yeah, I think at that point they were really just trying to find various avenues to make sure that these things got released in any way, shape, or form. You know, any way that they can get it out there, get it out there. It's definitely a figure that the diehard fans would be excited about, and so it kind of makes sense to me that it would be at a convention. while it's definitely not going to be the first figure that somebody picks off a rack who's a more casual fan at Walmart.
True to form, the gas mask is removable, and those old school Kenner fans will appreciate that he has a yellow lightsaber.
I think that may be the only one I don't have. It's entirely possible.
We still aren't done with convention exclusives because San Diego Comic-Con. That year, one of the convention exclusives was a Ralph McQuarrie 2-pack of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda. I think it's interesting that they just give Obi-Wan a standard Obi-Wan lightsaber. Yoda just kind of looks like, you know, it's sort of a prototype Yoda design, just a little more elfin, or kind of getting Spaceball vibes of yogurt off of this person.
A little less Stuart Freeborn in the face.
So there were actually 5 figures you had to get at a convention that year.
But I'm just glad that they got them done, honestly. I really am.
And of course, 2 years later, Hasbro puts out multi-packs of all of these figures. Re-releases them in just 2 sets. All the work we did hunting these things down, nope, just buy them off the internet at one time.
But the multi-packs didn't actually include all of the accessories, I don't think. I don't know if you actually got the flame with Boba Fett. I remember there being something in those sets that people were telling me that they didn't actually include everything.
Now, in the years since, they've actually, Hasbro has been kind enough to trickle out a few more concept figures. In 2007, again, a Star Wars shop exclusive was a concept General Grievous based on the art of Warren Fu. In 2009, we got this concept Ki-Adi-Mundi by Derek Thompson, sort of a Clone Wars battle-weary, missing an eye, a concept Ki-Adi-Mundi for Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. And I think that's kind of neat. I like that they appreciate it. I appreciate that they still do that. But, you know, I was also hoping for a little bit more McQuarrie. And thankfully, we have this concept IG-88 that they put out. This one was also 2009. I don't know, am I getting a black hole vibe off of this droid? Is that what I'm seeing here with the...
Yeah, I get a little bit of a Maximilian feel from the way that he has the very broad shoulders that go down to some very, very tapered off limbs. I certainly get the same feeling, especially with the very flat head. But actually inside this book again, I happened to find while we were talking.
Well, there you are.
Yep, the picture of IG-88.
Same year, 2009, we got another concept snowtrooper. This one from Joe Johnston art. So we have actually 2 figure sets made by the director of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. This one's actually kind of neat because you can compare and contrast it to the Ralph McQuarrie figure and to a finalized snowtrooper. And it's just kind of, you know, amusing to see 3 very different takes on ultimately the same subject. Whereas the McQuarrie one looks, you know, you squint and you can see the final snowtrooper. This Joe Johnston one, I just see samurai in space. Especially with the blue setting off the white and then the layered armor look. And this helmet. I mean, Vader obviously based off a samurai look too, but this is really apparent.
Yeah, the heavy use of color actually really puts me way more in mind of Clone Wars clone troopers than it does anything from the Stormtroopers.
And then finally, I think we would be remiss if we did not bring this up. While it's not technically based on concept art, there is the Boba Fett prototype armor figure they put out. This is actually based on actual armor that was created before Empire Strikes Back came out, when these were still being considered as a new type of Imperial Super Commando. If you know your Star Wars lore, you would know that the cape on this actual armor was actually a Star Wars towel. Well, for here, they just kind of gave him a little star logo. This was a mail-in figure in 2011 on a card, but was also re-released in 2017 as a Walmart exclusive for the Black Series.
Yeah, actually it's been sitting there behind me right next to Metal Hawk for several episodes in the Black Series package. I don't know if you really can see it though.
I should point out that there's also a 6-inch version in the Black Series as well. That one, I think, has a more accurate cape deco. I know if you want the most accurate one, you should go for the Hot Toys release, because that one is straight up the towel.
Wow.
But that is it in regards to the 3 3/4 inch Hasbro Kenner connection. I know we mentioned Hot Wheels earlier. You want to take it away there, Patrick?
Now, these aren't based on anything from Ralph McQuarrie. People who are avid Star Wars fans already know, I'm sure, that prior to McQuarrie helping out Lucas, there was another person who'd previously worked on 2001, The Space Odyssey, working in the models and in some of the design department on that movie. He helped Lucas, I believe it was in like 1975, it was Colin Cantwell, and whenever Hot Wheels got the license to make Star Wars vehicles for their Star Wars Starships toy line, they actually did 2 waves of concept vehicles, and I never saw these at Walmart. I actually happened across them in GameStop and was pretty blown away. And for example, the Millennium Falcon that Philip mentioned earlier that looked a lot like the Eagle from Space 1999 is one of the ships that is in this toy line. So that is the Millennium Falcon. I can definitely see why these wouldn't have been necessarily picked up at Walmart for your average audience just buying them, but for me this is what I really love. And here's the Colin Cantwell X-Wing, and it does have the wings that fold. They don't quite flatten, but they go from this kind of X to the sharper X.
The pointier X.
The pointier one, yeah. And it has all the coloring from his original models, because when he was doing the concepts for things, not only did he create some paintings, but he actually built some physical models. I remember the anecdote of the Death Star that he built. He was having trouble making a perfect sphere, and so he convinced Lucas that it would be better if there was a trench around the hemisphere of the Death Star, just to make it a little easier for him to make the model for it, because then he didn't have to join the 2 halves together seamlessly. And then, of course, the trench run happened. And here is the Star Destroyer from that same toy line. It should be noted, though, that Colin Cantwell actually had, I believe this was his design as well. This isn't part of the concept line that Hot Wheels put out. This is part of the movie, the Solo movie. This is the ship that, in the movie Solo, I believe that it appears in the Imperial recruitment video, but there was also a deleted scene that used it. But it was based on his art, so I kind of have them with this. Yeah, so this is the Arrestor Cruiser. I suppose that these are implied to be tractor beams that are all around this. I definitely don't like it as much as the Star Destroyer design that we got, but I love the fact that some of these initial ideas that were not explored in the movie are then later explored in a different way or reused. They made the land speeder. It's a much different looking land speeder, and it has a Luke Skywalker in there that looks to be also based on the... Actually, that looks like it's maybe the McQuarrie concept art Luke that is piloting that. I'm not sure on that. But then they also did lastly, they did the TIE Fighter, which actually the supports for those solar panels are really thick compared to the original Colin Cantwell model, but I kind of see why Hot Wheels would do that. Honestly, if they had taken how thin those were and then scaled it down as well, they would have been so flimsy, it probably would have broken.
It was snapped in package.
Yeah. Some of these designs that were pre-production designs have not only been revisited by Hasbro/Kenner, but Lucasfilm has also looked back to them, haven't they?
Absolutely. If you've ever seen the Clone Wars or Star Wars Rebels, especially Star Wars Rebels, you will note right away those McQuarrie designs, those Joe Johnston designs. Those were all kind of sometimes very obviously integrated in, sometimes very subtly integrated in. Main character from the cast, Zeb Aurelius, he's almost a dead ringer for that pre-production Chewbacca. And then sometimes they're just very blatant. That McQuarrie Han Solo figure, he's essentially a background character in season 1. He's just there in like 4 or 5 episodes. He's just standing around. I don't think he was ever given a voice, but I can appreciate that they were bringing that back. Chopper from Rebels, obviously with the little arms on the head, very much based off of that Macquarie R2-D2 design.
I'd even say that Macquarie R2-D2 is a little bit shorter than a regular astromech droid. Kind of like Chopper.
If you appreciate it, no good idea gets thrown out, and stuff like this is proof positive. And speaking of, even bad ideas sometimes make their way through. In late 2013, shortly before Dark Horse lost the license, they actually made an 8-issue adaptation of one of those early scripts of the Star Wars. Amusingly enough, between issues 3 and 4, they put out an issue 0 because the artist was kind of falling behind. So it's technically a 9-issue run. And I appreciate it. They do integrate some of those Macquarie designs. There's a lot of stuff that was made up for it. As Pat's showing, it was collected into a trade paperback. It was also collected into a hardcover. I don't think either of these have anything new in their collection that you can't get in the individual issues. Even the little art guide in the back is just a reprint of what was in issue 0. But if you want to track down the books, I would suggest doing so. The cheapest option is actually getting a digital copy. That's only going to set you back $5. But I will say this. As much as I appreciate this story being adapted, created, finally seeing the light of day, it's not a great story. There's too many characters. The story kind of meanders a bit. You know, characters will go from one city to the next just to be able to go to the next city. There's a part where they're trying to get to one planet, but then they get diverted at the midway point, so they end up never going to that planet. And that gets a sequel tease at the end of issue 8 that they're finally going to go to that planet.
Yeah, I believe that this I picked up a used copy. I think that it cost me $20 maybe 2-3 years ago. So also not, you know, terribly unaffordable for somebody who just wants to have a physical copy like I do.
I do appreciate, again, we haven't even touched on the Action Fleet Micro Machines put out, largely because neither of us have much in the way of that.
I guess just to mention them, the Action Fleet line was the Micro Machines line where you could actually pull the little figures out. But what was weird is that the concept vehicles of the Action Fleet set were not full Action Fleet size. They were scaled down and included with their corresponding vehicles.
And they're kind of in scale with Hot Wheels more than actual Micro Machines.
They definitely were bigger than Micro Machines, but smaller than the Action Fleet stuff, which put them at their own scale as far as Galoob stuff goes. I don't think that there was anything else that went along with them. They definitely would be neat to have. Maybe I should look at more of those too, but...
See, this is the problem with this show. It does cost us money because we want the stuff the other people are talking about.
And it's not the only time some of this concept stuff has leaked into other things. I mean, Hasbro put out those helmets, and the Macquarie Darth Vader, because of its use in, what was it, in Rebels?
Yeah, Vader appears briefly in Season 1 and briefly in Season 2, but his helmet is definitely more Macquarie designed in those episodes.
Yeah, so that helmet ended up being released as a toy. So a lot of this stuff does have its way of leaking into other things. But I think that it's a great thing whenever Hasbro or whatever other company that has a license to make things actually takes the time to dip into some of the great ideas that the very talented people came up with while they were kicking around thoughts for Star Wars. Not every great idea has time to fit into 2 hours.
I think that's about covers it. I think we've gotten very in-depth in this.
Yeah, more than I expected to.
Yeah, basically we love Ralph McQuarrie, we love Joe Johnston, we love all these designers, and we're always excited when the early designs that have to be, brought back down to reality, when we can get those in our hands and let our own imaginations go wild.
Absolutely. Toys for the imagination. Tools for the imagination.
And of course, as we're a toy podcast, we can't let December go by without acknowledging the season. Whether it's Hanukkah or Kwanzaa or whatever you celebrate. For us, it's Christmas. And with that comes certain traditions.
Yeah, as a G.I. Joe channel, 1964 is a pretty important year for us, I would say. But in 1964 wasn't only the launch of G.I. Joe, but it also was the premiere of a very influential and important holiday special. Not the Star Wars holiday special. That was later, and that wasn't quite as good. Yeah, what I'm talking about is Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. It premiered in 1964, and for me, I wasn't around in '64. I was around much later. But growing up, that special, I realized, as an adult, I realized that it really shaped and formed my concept and my idea of what Santa Claus was about. So that special really has a spot of fondness for me. And in 2001, there was a computer-generated sequel to it that was released direct-to-video called Rudolph the Red-Nosed... Well, I think it was called Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and the Island of Misfit Toys. Or maybe just Rudolph and the Island of Misfit Toys. I've seen it written both ways. But I don't know if it was good or if it wasn't. I wasn't terribly interested. I liked the original special, and that's kind of where I was. But the interesting thing is that a line of toys was created that year. There were, I think, about 6 figures and a 16-inch abominable snowman that were released in 2001 for Rudolph and the Island of Misfit Toys. And I looked at them and I thought, you know what? I like the show, I like Christmas, but I don't need those because I'm really not into figures that aren't that well articulated. You know, I'm going to be very, very particular about what I buy, and I don't want to spend my money on another toy line. So 2001 came out, these 6 figures, and a really great abominable snowman, snow monster, was released, and I let them pass by. Then in 2002, they re-released a few of those, and they released some really big sets, and I looked at them and thought, these things are really cool. For example, in 2002, so you already had like Santa and Rudolph and some of the others, but they released things like Yukon Cornelius's Sled Dog Team. There just aren't big sets like this that are done for many things. I mean, you have Yukon, he has his banjo, he has his pickaxe. It's almost a shame to take one out of the box. That's why I have one in the box. But they released other things in 2002. I believe this was a 2002 one. Yeah, it still says Rudolph and the Island of Misfit Toys. They re-released Sam the Snowman with Rudolph and Clarice, but they flocked them. So now in 2002, things were kind of stepping up. As a matter of fact, if you thought the Yukon Sled Dog Team was a large set, take a look at this one. Oh, and Santa just took a dive. There he is. I have opened this. It is a very, very large set.
Santa's had a little too much hot chocolate.
Right. I didn't quite wire tie him back in there the way that I wanted to. I just couldn't bear to get rid of the box. Yeah, so this is a really big set, and the reason why there's only 6 reindeer in behind Rudolph, when I first looked at this, I thought, well, that's not right.
There's 2 more.
Yeah, but that's not the case. If you actually watch the special, the reason why they only included 6 plus Rudolph is because that's actually how the show ends. It's very easy to miss, but I think that this many of them maybe fit better on a TV so that you could see all of them, or it was just more expensive to create more reindeer. I don't really know the reason why.
They had to animate those legs somehow.
Yeah, but that's a huge set. So in 2002, they kind of blew up with these based on the success of them in 2001. And Memory Lane, again playing Mantis, released them again in 2003, but in 2003 they dropped the name based on that direct-to-DVD sequel, Rudolph and the Island of Misfit Toys, and they just re-released them as Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Well, this wasn't released until later, but this is the kind of package that they ended up being in later, and it just actually says Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer at the top. 2003 happened, and I'd actually still managed to resist buying these, and then I believe it was my mother found some on clearance and gave them to me, and she got me a set that included Rudolph and Hermie, the elf. And I had assumed wrong about these toys. I didn't want figures that were not well articulated. And if I had bought them, I would have found out that they actually did an amazing job of hiding the articulation for these, because not only does he have the removable hat, but he has articulated wrists, the waist is articulated.
Huh.
I was amazed at how well they hid the leg articulation, because they actually have a ball shape here that it's split in half. So each leg does fully move forward. It has a really good range of motion. And then they also articulated the ankles. So these things, and the neck, they are fully articulated. I was really, really impressed. And later on, to make things even better, rather than having a hat that snaps on, they embedded a magnet in the head of some of the elves so that you take the hat and just pop it on there and it stays. The level of detail that went into these, my mind was blown. And of course, that's whenever you find that you're addicted to the toy line and that you have to have more. Luckily that year, I also picked up this guy. I think maybe my mother bought this one for me too.
That's a big bumble.
It is a big bumble. He does not bounce. He's just very furry, does not bounce. But he has an armature inside of him that makes it so that he can stand. So they did not just make it be a plush that kind of flops around. He stands. You'll see that his hand is kind of positioned in a particular way. That's because this one included a tree that has sounds, plays the music from the show, and it includes a star so that the Bumble can put the star on top of the tree, and he has the articulated mouth. This is the Humble Bumble that was released in 2003. The Bumble's Reform, maybe this is what this is called. Because he doesn't have the teeth. The one that was released the year prior to this did have teeth. So at this point, not only are they expanding the line to include crazy, huge sets, but they're also kind of getting very intricate and giving you detailed stuff that came throughout the show. And this thing is really amazing. Like, the fur that they chose, even down to that, like, the shape that they managed to get out of the head, even though it's covered in this fur, and you can see like the pecs are separated from the gut. This is a really well-made toy. So my mind was kind of blown, and I realized, you know what? I kind of don't really decorate that much for Christmas. These things are the perfect way for me to decorate. And so now I had an excuse to go out and buy more in 2004.
Isn't that all we always need? An excuse to buy more.
That is absolutely right. We need a way to rationalize this. So in 2003, I got excited. I went back and I bought some of the ones that had come out in 2002, including the Sled Dog Team and the Flocked Clarice and Rudolph and the Santa and Sleigh and Reindeer. And I was really just excited to get whatever I could find. And in 2004, the line got even more popular, I think, because up until then, you could find them at places like Sam Goody, I think, and you could find them at Toys R Us, but I'd never really seen them at Walmart. I did get some at Target in 2003, but not at Walmart. But in 2004, they were literally everywhere. You could find them everywhere. And they released things like this. In the action figure line, in a package was just this in 2004. It literally is just two trees and some birds. So within their toy line, they were expanding things to the point where you were getting Dio pieces.
Well, you really know when you've made it, when you can put out a set without any actual figures in it and still expect it to sell.
Yeah, and that one was really hard to find because they did short pack that one. And I can remember going around to various Walmarts. They had one of those aisle displays where you could dig through for the various figures. And I think that each aisle display would have like one or two Winter Wonderland sets, and that was it. But I was super excited, and in the process, they were releasing also, whenever you would get a figure, like the single-packed figures, usually they would come with a decent array of accessories, and across that, they would include sometimes some of the misfits. Things like the Spotted Elephant were released, and King Moonracer. I love the King Moonracer. He's actually flocked, and he's articulated. It's a wonderful looking figure.
He doesn't transform into a car, though.
No, he doesn't. That's true. There is that other moon racer. But the sad part is that after 2004, actually earlier, I should back up. 2004, they did release some of these things, but in June of 2004, Playing Mantis, that had been releasing these, was purchased by the RC2 company. But that wasn't actually the end of things, even though that did mean that in 2005, nothing was released. In 2006, there was a new company that came around called Forever Fun. And Forever Fun was actually an imprint of the parent company Round 2. And what I found out later was that we could just call this a new special, I guess, called like CEO Tomolo Saves Christmas. Because what it was is that the CEO, the former CEO of Playing Mantis, started a new company called Round 2, and because RC2 was not doing anything with Rudolph, any of the stuff that was canceled from Playing Mantis, he picked up and they would later release, if that makes any sense. So some of the great obscure items that had not come out yet that were shown at Toy Fair 2005 ended up being released in, I think actually some of that stuff ended up being released in 2007. 2006 mostly was just reissues, but they were good reissues. 2007 you ended up with figures that came with talking bases, so they were kind of like reissues, but they were things that Playing Mantis had shown off. 2008 was actually a great year because we got some really nice stuff. Like, take a look at this Reindeer Games Rudolph that has the flying base. He does come off the base, but then he has like the removable nose thing that if you pop it off and touch his tail, it still works. That's a pretty good battery that's in there. I have not replaced the batteries on this. But that's actually common of the Rudolph action figures that came out in this, I guess I should call it the Memory Lane / Forever Fun toy line, that a lot of them did include batteries and you could light up the nose. They released several Rudolph figures. Not only is he the star of the show, but just for accuracy to the show, he went through several different ages in the process. So they did release, you know, a Rudolph for each age. And they did them in a couple of sizes, but I'm mostly just interested in this scale. But also in 2007, there's something about a toy line that whenever they start really releasing the obscure items, that's whenever it feels like it's just completely full and they've done a good job. They released Fireball. The character that starts off being Rudolph's friend but then turns into a real jerk. Yeah, they made that action figure. Complete with his real hair on top.
Because why not?
Because why not? And he's actually very well articulated. Not only does he have articulation at the hips like Rudolph does, but they actually gave him knee articulation in all four legs. So he, of course, doesn't have the light up feature, so it was going to be a little bit cheaper to produce him anyway compared to Rudolph. But he's really fully articulated. Here we have the Island of Misfit Toys, which I guess found their home in my home. And
how fitting.
They had to release some of them like bit by bit. I believe that the train, the front end of it I think came with a boy elf, the back end of it came with a girl elf, things like that. But slowly they released most of them. I actually rewatched the show trying to figure out which Island of Misfit toys that they did not make, and there are not a ton of them. They released later that year well, here's an example actually of the ones. These were the ones done by Memory Lane, had them in kind of like a blue package, and Forever Fun had them in a red package. And you can see here that this elf comes with the base. And they actually released pretty much the whole band. They released that many elves that you can make your whole elf band. But here, and this is definitely a sign that this toy line has really gone pretty far. You have a cowboy riding an ostrich. if you have a cowboy riding an ostrich actually in your toy line, it's pretty thorough, I think. But that's not actually the one that I display with my other stuff. This one's a little weird because sometimes the scale of things was thrown off a little bit by what price point they wanted to hit. There is a Abominable Snowman Bumble that is in a package this size. I never bought that one because it doesn't feel like it goes with any of these toys. As a matter of fact, it got released at one point with small PVCs. So it came in the same package size as these, but doesn't really belong with them. I kind of feel that way also about the cowboy riding the ostrich. That's why I still have him packaged, is that I bought him and then I looked at him and thought, you know what? He's not as good as the other cowboy riding an ostrich. So I guess in some ways I do treat him as a misfit toy. Oops.
You monster.
Right. The Charlie in the box, they actually put on a spring. Like, there's a lot of great details to these, and they've re-released him a couple times so that he has, like, he's a Bendum. He has that metal armature underneath, like you would see in any of the Bendums line. But there's just a lot here. So I thought that it would be a good idea, because it's the holiday and because this Christmas special is so important to so many people, to kind of highlight what really is out there for this toy line. Because looking at them in the package at the time, it was really easy to just assume that they weren't great quality if you were to actually open one. But once you get one open, you realize that the level of detail that they put into them and the craftsmanship was really there as far as articulation. They were sparing no expense. These things were very high quality toys, and it may be one of the best overlooked toy lines of the 2000s. What was your exposure to Rudolph, Philip, if I may ask?
Oh, I think I just, watching TV in the 80s, they just kind of came on, and I was sitting with family, and so I had to watch it along with it too. I honestly couldn't tell you the first time I saw that special.
Yeah, I think that it just kind of always felt like it was always around to me. I think that I don't remember watching it for the first time, probably because I just always watched it as far back as I can remember.
I'm sure they even showed it after school at school while we were being waiting to pick up with our parents.
But in 2011, Forever Fun scaled these down, and they'd kind of been... I guess I should back up and say in 2010 they did a lot of repaints. I think I maybe mentioned that already. And you got, like, the Santa action figure, instead of being in red, he was in green. And they were doing a lot of things just to make the line kind of different, but they weren't necessarily things that were in the show. So in 2011, in order to change things up, they scaled them down, and you were getting smaller versions of the same characters. I kind of felt like the 2011 releases didn't match the show as well, and that I already had pretty much everybody from the show. I would love to actually customize some of the other Misfit toys, but they're hard to figure out what they even are. There's just, some of them are in the back corner of a couple of shots, just to make it look like a lot of toys are coming into the shot in some of those scenes. But I really love this toy line, and I thought that I would show it to maybe some people who'd overlooked it. That probably about does it for the episode, I would say. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a good way to send us off. Go get that holiday spirit going, and yeah, say goodnight.
Yeah, absolutely. A Merry Christmas and good night. This is the part where Santa takes off in his sleigh. Hopefully not all jumbled around in here, and just kind of gives us a good night, right?
More or less, yeah. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, whatever you celebrate. We hope you take the joy of the season and spread it around. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, subscribe. We could use a little bit of that holiday joy too. I'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching this episode of Articulated Points. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'd appreciate it if you would like, share, and subscribe. If you'd like to learn more about some of the toys featured in this episode, or want to follow us on social media, links are in the description below this video.